Gupta in New York with Dani Berger in London. Russia has blamed Ukraine for drone attacks on it. These attacks say about the state of the war in Ukraine. Is it still on Ukrainian turf or has it shifted to Russia?
Well, there's very much a counteroffensive still going on the ground in Ukraine. Kiev's forces are pushing back in the south and the east of the country, although it is very slow going. And what we're seeing is an escalation in air attacks as a result. We're seeing Russia use missile strikes on Black Sea ports in particular, trying to hit grain infrastructure, trying to penalize Ukraine economically, and most recently today hitting President Volodymyr Zelensky's hometown also. And in turn, what you're seeing is Ukrainian supporters, because Ukraine very rarely claims credit for these things, directly carrying out attacks, drone attacks on Russian soil, and in fact possibly even missile attacks on parts of Russian soil. So you've seen that pick up. Certainly the number of drones that are coming into Moscow or the greater Moscow area are picking up. But interestingly in all of this, the thing that really seems to rile the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, is not these attacks on Moscow or inside Russian territory, but it's when Ukraine goes for Crimea, of course, which he annexed almost a decade ago. And that's where we tend to see Russia retaliating.
There's still efforts for peace talks, this time through Saudi. Zelensky's chief of staff saying that they would host a meeting soon with national security and political advisors. What does it mean to have this hosted on Saudi Arabia's soil?
Well, it's very interesting that Saudi Arabia seems to be doing the running here. These are not actually going to be peace talks. There's not a peace negotiation at this point in time. What they are is trying to bring in a collection of nations to talk about security guarantees for Ukraine at whatever point in the future there is no longer a conflict going on. What we know is that Ukraine's allies in Europe and the US have already signed up for bilateral security guarantees for Ukraine. What they want is many other countries to join in. So we're talking India, Brazil, possibly even China, Turkey, bringing those countries into the tent on that. So this is a conversation about a really big umbrella of security guarantees for Ukraine, hopefully to sort of point in the direction of peace talks, but no peace talks happening yet.
Rasalind, in our kind of last minute here, where does the U.S. fall in all this? Are they clearly not brokering the negotiations, but where is their kind of say? Of course, we know they support Ukraine, but where does the country really fall in terms of being a part of this process?
Well, certainly one of the biggest allies of Ukraine throughout since Russia's invasion, supporting it militarily, financially, diplomatically, and being a real advocate for Ukraine on the ground. The interesting thing is, at what point does that US narrative start to shift? Do they start to push Zelensky towards having negotiations? Because they've been the one really that Zelensky is potentially listening to the most. So as we get into the US election cycle, which could create some difficulty at home in these conversations, do you start to see the US saying this war's gone on for 18 months or 2 years or whatever? We need to get to the point of negotiation. That's the narrative that's going to be really interesting to watch.
Right, and a lot of the world will be in an election cycle, so that's certainly an interesting dynamic. Roz, thank you so much, as always, for joining us. That's Bloomberg's Rasalind Mathieson. Now, coming up, we'll get back to the equity story and speak to Matt Maley, Miller Tabak Chief Markets